and welcome to More to the Story. My name is Michelle Ankerberg, and I'm here with my cousin, Jeff Blanche.
And we're here at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention in Nashville, Tennessee, and we're getting to sit down with some of the leading Christian broadcasters all around the world to hear what God is doing. We have the special honor of getting to sit with Erwin Lutzer today. Erwin is the pastor emeritus at the Moody Church in Chicago, Illinois, and he pastored there for 36 years or so?
36 years.
Wow, yeah. And right now we have a lot going on with Ukraine. Everybody's watching the situation there. There's millions of refugees that are fleeing there. And Erwin's family actually has a similar story with that years ago with your parents eventually leaving Ukraine and eventually working their way to Canada. So we'd love to...
Yeah. You know, what happened to my parents is in World War I, not World War II, but World War I, they were Germans within the Ukraine, and they became refugees because Russia feared that the Germans within its borders might mutiny. And so my father's family went to Afghanistan. His mother, my grandmother, died there, and a brother the next day. My mother's family went to Siberia. Again, kids died along the way. Now, I have to say that my parents went through exactly what you see today on the news. But the difference is simply this, that today we see it played out in real time. We go to television and we see what war is like, but they were on boxcars for days, the same kind of tragedy, which is really terrible. So when it comes to the whole issue of the Ukraine, I have a great deal of interest in it, as does everyone, but especially because some of the cities that are actually mentioned in the news today, some of those cities are ones in which my parents lived. Now, very quickly, and many of you have heard me say this, they came to Canada independently. My father asked if he could walk my mother home. First date, he asked whether or not she would marry him. Within 3 weeks, they were married.
Wow.
They lived together for 77 years.
Wow.
My father to 106, my mother to 103. And I always say they lived so long that I'm sure until my father died, all of their friends in heaven thought that they just didn't make it. But they made it.
Wow. That's great. Yeah. You think you're going to live that long?
Not a chance. No, the good thing about old age, though, is, Michelle, it doesn't last very long.
That's very true.
And so I knew that it would take a long time to get old, but I actually thought it would take longer.
Yeah.
So we will not live as long as our parents. As a matter of fact, my oldest brother died recently at the age of 89. But I have a tremendous heritage, and the big lesson for everyone listening here is the prayers of my parents, which to this day, I'm sure have influenced me, even though they've been in heaven for a long time.
Yeah.
That's great.
So how did you come to faith then?
I was brought up in a Christian home. They, of course, read the Bible to us in German all the time. So we were schooled in the Christian faith, but this is so important for people to hear. I frequently asked Jesus to come into my heart, but I had no assurance of faith. In fact, as a boy, I thought maybe I couldn't be saved. But when I was 14, I still remember out on the farm, there was a dipper over here that everybody drank from. I remember so clearly my mother, when I was drinking, said, "We think it's time for you to get saved." And I'll never forget my answer. I said, "I tried it, but it doesn't work for me." And she said, "Christ has to be received by faith, whether you feel differently or not." We went into the old dining room or living room, small little room, got on our knees, and that night I prayed by faith that I would receive Jesus. And the next day I knew that I knew God. And so that assurance of salvation has never left me.
Wow.
So when you got saved, did you think you would go into the ministry, or what did you want to do?
Well, Michelle, when I got saved at about the age of 11 or 12, my family, my siblings went to the first Billy Graham rally.
Wow.
Not the rally, it was Billy's first movie entitled Mr. Texas. You're far too young to have remembered that, of course, because that came out in about 1952. And it was in black and white. And I saw Billy preaching to 40,000 people in Rice Stadium, Houston, Texas. And I became a fan of Billy Graham. My teenagers, my generation was into Elvis, and I was into Billy. And I always say, I think I made the better choice. So there was something within me out at the farm, something within me that told me this was not my destiny. So on my father's tractor, I memorized scripture. I pretended that I was preaching to thousands of people. There always was that inner calling that I didn't understand, but I knew that the farm wasn't really where I was going to be.
Wow. So fast forward many years, you went to seminary where actually you met up with my dad. That's how you became friends, knowing him then. And how did you get to Moody Church to be the pastor, which is a very interesting story.
First of all, a word about your father.
Yes, yeah.
Here's my memory, okay? We're sitting in a classroom together. He is directly across from me. The class is out. It's dismissed. And somehow, he and I began to talk about ministry. I don't remember the exact words, Michelle, but I did know this, that your dad already back then was very focused on the whole issue of ministry and evangelism.
Right.
And I noticed that he had a real sincerity about him in terms of that conviction. So, as you well know, we have been friends ever since.
Right.
But let me talk about Moody Church, okay? Rebecca and I get married. I teach for a year in Canada after that. We come to the States. I want to go to a different place, Drew University, to work on a PhD. Somebody says stay in Chicago. I become the pastor of the Edgewater Baptist Church. But here's the story I want everyone to hear. It has to do with God's providence in my life. God directs us when we are unaware of it. I was pastor of Edgewater, and then after 5 years I resigned to teach full-time at Moody Bible Institute. We woke up the first Sunday of 1977, that is the first Sunday of April, without a church to go to. I wanted to go to a different church. Rebecca said, let's go to the Moody Church. Now you have to understand that whenever I hear the voice of God, it sounds an awful lot like Rebecca. So we went down to Moody Church, just 2 kids, this is 77. I told her that I would find a parking spot over there and, far away because there was no parking.
Right.
Lo and behold, a guy pulls out right in front of me. I back in, I go into the lobby, I meet Rebecca. Wiersbe, the pastor, was leaving. He had his coat on and was going out the door. And I said, Wiersbe, what are you doing here? It's 10 minutes before the morning service. He said, Erwin Lutzer, I'm sick. I'm on my way home. Will you preach for me this morning? So the first time we ever attended a service at Moody Church, I preached at Moody Church.
Wow.
And that became one of the links that God arranged in this chain, so by which eventually I would be the pastor of the Moody Church.
Wow. And of course, Moody Church has so much history to it. How did you feel being in those shoes?
That's a really good question. How did I feel?
Yeah.
Maybe I was too naive to realize that I should really feel intimidated. But I don't know if your listeners have ever seen a picture of Moody Church. They ought to go online and see it. Architecturally, it's one of the most beautiful churches in all of America. It was actually patterned after the Church of Holy Wisdom in Istanbul. So you look at this huge, beautiful church, and that first Sunday, standing on the platform when I was preaching, without knowing I would preach, I preached from Psalm chapter 1. In my heart, I said for fun, if they ever call me, I'll say yes. But that was just for fun. I didn't know that later Wiersbe would resign, go back to the Bible. Eventually I'd become the interim pastor and then the pastor. All that was in God's providence. And here's the important lesson. I know I've already said it, but I have to say it again. And I want to look into the camera and tell everyone this. God leads us even when we are unaware of it. We make very ordinary decisions, that as far as we are concerned have no special significance. But as we look back, we see the providence of God. But providence is not something that you understand immediately. It's in retrospect that you see that God has led you. And He leads you in the most ordinary ways, unexpectedly.
Yeah, right.
And suddenly you discover, wow, this was of God, and you didn't really know it.
That's so true. Yeah.
What would you say are some of the things you learned while you were pastoring at Moody?
What are the things that I learned when I was pastoring at Moody? Well, how many hours did you say that we would have,
so
right? One of the things I discovered is that it's easier to hire than it is to fire.
That's very true.
That's really basic.
Yes.
You know, so often we hire people and they don't exactly turn out, and then you let them go and you discover all the backwash. And it's so difficult because you love these people. They're believers, they're friends of yours, and yet if they don't fit into the ministry and you move them on, there are hurt feelings. That's really difficult. The other thing I think that I learned is the necessity of elder leadership. Now, my leadership style is not, the strong type A, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. I am much more retiring, so I look to the staff for leadership, and the reason I think we were successful is because I became a cheerleader for their ideas, but also when it came to the elders. It was so important for me to gain consensus with the elders so that I would not be getting out there on my own somewhere. And, people ask, well, how do you endure for 36 years? I think that being a pastor is something like a marriage. In other words, if it's a good fit, a good relationship, it can go on for a long time. But if you're on different pages, and many pastors accept pastorates and they think the church is going to go in this direction, the church wants to go in this direction, and so it isn't just a good fit. And that's why I would say to everyone else out there, be very careful whom you choose for leadership. Be very careful whom you choose to be a pastor. Pray much, seek God, because there have been obviously many, many errors. Now, I'm going to jump real far ahead here, Michelle. I transitioned in 2016 and became pastor emeritus. God has been very pleased to continue to grow our media ministry in all kinds of ways I couldn't have predicted. But here's the thing. I say to pastors, when it's time to leave when nobody wants to see you go.
That's good.
And leave without any debt. So many pastors are in a building program, they get their church into debt, and then God calls them to something better. And the way people remember you is not all the great sermons that you preached, but they will remember how you left the church behind. So we have to concentrate on that. But, in between, you learn, for example, that your sermons don't do as much good as you think they do. We put a lot of money, a lot of effort into our sermons, and there's so much that just blows by people. Sure. And we don't recognize that at first. And so, there are lots of humbling experiences through the experience. You do have some opposition.
Sure.
There's some people who don't like you.
Right.
We have to, as pastors, get over the idea that everybody is going to like us.
Yeah.
You can't please everybody, and you know that you're going to experience some hurts. You're going to experience, others are going to be hurt by you, because the church is a conglomeration of redeemed people, but they are still people, and oftentimes very much flawed. So
that's very true.
That's what's so important for us to know.
What would be your advice for pastors that are starting out today?
Advice for pastors that are starting out today. Michelle, I think they have to maintain the disciplines of the Christian life.
Sure.
Now, as a pastor, you can get by with all kinds of things. You can, of course, fritter your time away and so forth. But staying close to God, staying close to your wife and family is absolutely necessary. If you are a successful pastor but you lose your wife or your children, that is not a trade-off. And what we need to do is to keep those priorities. Now let me say a word about young pastors, since you asked that. Young pastors, and I know that I had this, had a desire to prove themselves. You begin to compare yourself with others. And Paul says comparing yourself with others is not wise. And it certainly is not. So what you have to do is to make sure that you don't get into this comparison game. When you're at a pastor's conference and people say, how many people attend your church? Pastors give the attendance at their last Easter service. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
We all like to think of ourselves as better and as competent. And we just need the humility to know that we might not be as successful as a lot of other people. And we need to be okay with that. We don't have to think that we have to attain what others have. Have you ever noticed this? Michelle, you asked, what have I learned? One thing I learned is that God sometimes blesses people that I wouldn't bless if I were God.
Right, yeah, that's so true. Yeah.
And God sometimes blesses people who disagree with me.
Right.
So we have to walk that fine line between being understanding and tolerant, but yet hang on to truth, to sometimes know what has to be hung on to and what isn't that determinative. And so what we have to do is the best we can, always remaining gospel-centered. But as you know, I speak to the issues of the culture, and I do that to try to help people to navigate the culture.
Sure.
But in the end, it always has to come down to Jesus. It has to come down to the gospel,
right,
which is redemption.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Right.
And you and John have been good friends for a while now. So you mentioned how you guys met at seminary.
That's right.
That was years ago. And you've been on the show many times over the years. Do you know how many times you've been on?
No.
Okay, yeah, it's a lot of times.
I was on the show when it was kind of done in a back room,
right,
with a video camera.
Yeah, that's right.
And, those were the days that John was starting out. But the thing that I take delight in is the fact that the ministry has grown so much, Michelle.
It really has, yeah.
I mean, really, around the world, and John continues to tell me about, in this country and that country, and I'm so glad I don't have to understand it all to get to heaven,
right,
or to figure out how it all works. So I have witnessed John going from, a camera in a back room,
That's right,
in a study somewhere, and I was doing something, and I know that there's still some of those things online. They look pretty ancient.
Yeah.
Even my glasses were big glasses in those days. But to see throughout the years the growth of the ministry, the fact that its impact is as wide as it has.
Yeah.
And if you ask the question about your father, from the impression I get, he is certainly a disciplined man.
That's very true, yes.
I want to say, John, relax. Have you ever tried to tell him that?
I tried, but it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
No.
He just has this laser focus. There's another program, another opportunity to share the gospel, and another time also to encourage other ministries, which I think is so wonderful. I think that's one of the reasons God has blessed the ministry so much is John is not trying to hog the ministry, he's trying to share the ministry.
Exactly.
So, and then of course your mother is so incredibly competent.
Yeah.
I mean, she's the one who understands the office and understands the whole operation and
That's right.
and all those things. And Were it not for that,
Right.
well, we don't know.
That's right.
you know?
It would not be.
It would
where
not
it is.
be.
No,
It would
no.
not be where it is.
It's like
and
with your
so
wife, Rebecca.
all that
Yeah,
you
that's
can
right.
do is to
That's
say
right.
God put the two of them together.
That's
and
right.
you know, a friend of mine says that marriage is like, for his birthday, he got a humidifier and a dehumidifier, so he put them in the same room and just let them fight it out. You know? So sometimes God puts husbands and wives together, but in the process of trying to, bring their gifts together, you see the kind of thing that is seen in your parents, which is such a sense of harmony and mutual support.
Yeah.
Like
It's really true.
Rebecca,
Right.
your mother is so fiercely loyal to John, loyal to his needs,
Right.
always looking after him,
Right.
and that's a tremendous
That's what you
gift.
need for in the
That's
ministry.
what you need,
That's right.
yeah.
That's right.
So you're one fortunate young lady to have the parents
well,
that
we
you
appreciate
do.
that.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you and what you've done and being on the program and just what you've done for the Lord in your ministry. And hopefully we have many more years that we can have you on and,
I'll
and
see.
to present the
I
gospel.
turned 80 the other day, and
Wow.
I maybe already mentioned that old age doesn't last very
That's
long.
right, yeah, that's very true.
So what we have to do is to try to maximize the years that God has given
That's
us.
right.
And I know that I knew I was going to grow old. I thought it would take longer,
Yeah,
but here we are.
that's right.
So I want to thank you for this opportunity to share, and especially I'd like to say a word of encouragement to all who have listened to this, and to tell all of you how pleased I am that I could be a part of the Ankerberg ministry, the opportunities that I've had to be on the program to share the good news of the gospel around the world. And we're living in an era when everything around us seems to be falling apart. The culture is deconstructing, to use a word. What we need is an anchor, namely the Bible, in the midst of all of the conflicting voices. And if we have that anchor, all of the driftwood can just simply be let go. Because when it comes time to die, here's my final sentence that I don't ever want you to forget. The only thing that really matters is what matters for all eternity. Thank you.